Hi everyone, I'm Pete Stevens. I'm doing a Master's in Sustainable Design, and it just really made me chuckle actually just listening to Emma there about saying that you're sort of caught up with things that are glittery like a magpie. So I'm a real experimental creative researcher, and I find that really fits me very well. I have dyslexia and auditory processing, and I'm a very visual learner. I talk about the disparity lens of disability because it's the differences within the disability that I find so interesting, and other people have spoken as well about how that can show up differently and how our disabilities are all very different. Interesting, I've used a camera lens for my first slide, and what happened to me was I had an industrial accident 19 years ago where I damaged the lower half of my body, my lower back and my pelvis, which created extreme levels of pain, which now is chronic pain, and mobility issues. Because I had an industrial accident, not only did I have to go through and prove myself to clinicians on a weekly basis, I was also surveillance. So this is why the camera lens is really quite sort of prevalent for my work. That's something we don't really talk about because there's quite a lot of shame around that, where we have to prove ourselves. I had a court hearing as well, which I did win in the end, but the trauma of going through that, of proving yourself through clinicians and through, so that was NHS clinicians, and then also I would be seeing private clinicians and they wouldn't talk to each other. I had lots and lots of healthcare notes. I'd had lots of scans that proved the damage that I'd had, and yet I still had to fight a court case, which was really traumatic and took probably the length of about 5 years fighting. So the disparities within disability are not just in the differences within the disabilities, but the differences in the everyday, the day and the night as well, and they can show up in all different ways. I have a lot of fatigue, and many times I've been told that I don't actually look disabled, which I did struggle with probably recognising my disability. I also have which is really interesting, I have a label of 30% disabled that I carry with me, and sometimes I refer to that, or sometimes I just disregard that. For me, understanding that is quite complex, because disability never really sat with me because it was so complex and multi-layered that I couldn't quite understand it. It was only going through probably about 5 years before I could go through a pain management program that I learned to understand what disability and what chronic pain really did to your body. I also, my first interaction with a GP, I was given medication, and I was prescribed pregabalin. Pregabalin, I think I was prescribed that in 2005, and I was on that drug for about 8 years with no interventions and no changes. Now, in 1st of April 2019, pregabalin was classified as a Class C drug in the sense of like heroin. I did have a prescribed pain medication addiction. I realised that was problematic when I would have my red wine with my tablets because I couldn't get quite enough hit to cover the pain. But I think there's a lot of shame around talking about medication addiction, especially prescribed medication addiction. I know there's lots of research into that now. The National Institute for Health, NICE, now released a statement that actually they now recognise that prescribed medication doesn't help chronic pain sufferers. So there will be a really big fallout with that at the moment. The reason I talk about healthcare a lot is because through my pain management programs, I went back in as a speaker and I set up a support group supporting people within the community. And I spoke at Brighton Hospital to clinicians, and that was really invaluable. But actually, my role within research is I'm a product maker, I'm a welder, I work with mild steel, but also now this creative practice really suits me because I look at alternative ways for otherwise pain care. I'm a real advocate for pain care within community and supporting people within their own homes and their community and within the everyday. So chronic pain affects between 1/3 and 1/2 of the population in the UK, so that equates to 28 million adults. Globally, chronic pain affects 20% of the adults. 10% are newly diagnosed every year, and chronic pain is more common in women, about 38%, than in men, which is 30%. This is from the NHS. So my first sort of interest probably in large-scale metalwork was making the invisible visible. So this is an installation I made that's metal, that's mild steel and resin, and these are, so this is immersive as well. So a person would sit, there's a little seat between within this installation, and you would wear ear defenders. And what I was trying to show people was actually that brain fog, that when you're in chronic pain and have huge fatigue, you're within the room. So this was a busy room, this was an installation, there was a show going on, but you're actually removed from people. You can't hear what people are saying, even though you can see they're talking to you. You can't comprehend the language or what they're asking you or talking about. You feel removed. So these are pain pods that get in the way of my thought processes. These were both 4 metre installations. This was a cage that you walked in, and this was the cage that I tried to describe was the chronic pain within inside, was the internal suffering that people couldn't recognise or couldn't see. And this was the pain just raining down on me that would then distort my views and my understanding of the world. And it became really disconnecting, which is why I think community work is so important to me now. I use myself, due to ethics, which is really interesting, we've all talked about this today, but due to just the Masters of 1 year course, and there's quite a quick time frame, but I use myself as a case study, which is really interesting. So I 3D printed myself, and I've taken a 3D picture of myself and then rendered that onto the 3D print of myself. It's interesting as a third agent. So when you go through pain management programs, you have a third agent. So you have a psychologist, a pain mentor, and a physiotherapist. And as a third agent, so that's outside of you, they enable you to look at yourself differently, to look at your mobility, to look at how you interact with the world, to question what you find difficult within your everyday. I remember talking about I struggled to make a roast dinner, and that was kind of my benchmark. So I learned ways actually to do that differently, and I would then do each part of the roast dinner. It would take me all day to make it, but the achievement I got at the end of that was really amazing. And I learned also about perching stool. So I would sit and peel the carrots, which some people would just take as a given that they can do that. And for me, that was a real milestone. So I use myself. I also believe that looking at ourselves, and if we can understand ourselves, then we can move beyond self and we can help others. But I think we have to come from a place of knowing ourselves and the difficulties that we face to be able to understand others better. Uncertainty is technology for disruption, and to reconceptualise uncertainty as generative and inevitable rather than seeing it as threatening. I think what we do within society is that we would rather hold on to the trauma and the difficulties because they're familiar to us. We recognise ourselves within that, and it's quite difficult to move beyond that. But it's recognising the technologies that I use is a privileged position to be within the university, so which is why I use this creative play to understand myself better, so that I can able to support others better. But I think uncertainty, I'm quite comfortable with uncertainty, because I think when you live with chronic pain, that becomes very uncertain each day. So another thing that my experimental practice is in motion caption, so you'll recognise that within films. So the reason that we can recognise almost ourselves within Planet of the Apes and Avatar and Gollum is because they use motion caption. They take human movement so that we can recognise that that's familiar to us again. So it's another kind of understanding of the world. So I put myself into this motion caption and looked at myself again, my mobility. I struggled to walk when I had my accident, so I had to learn how to walk better, how to walk easier. I was walking, I didn't realise that after my accident I was walking from my knees, and that created huge problems for my pelvis, which was already dislocated. So it was learning those physical aspects of the human body, which we don't really understand unless we have that as a career. The reason I really look at Gordon Pask and conversation theory, and Chantal and I do podcasts where we open conversation about what we're researching, but also how we share this knowledge. And this is really important when you come to be within healthcare. when as a patient you're speaking to clinicians and how we share that knowledge. And Abby was mentioning about the patient perhaps being the expert as well, and we're not seen as the expert with all our lived experience, but it's starting to be recognised now. But even 19 years after my accident, I still support people with chronic pain, and they still say the same problems that I faced 19 years ago. So I think there's something to really understand here how we share this knowledge, and to be open and responsive to that. And Gordon Pask looks into how these information loops on a cybernetic framework and how this information can move around and be understood with different people and conversations. The other experimental work that I'm just doing at the moment, which was really insightful, I'm usually I have quite a lot of critiques about what I'm using this technology for. I'm from a design discipline. I'm not a technologist, but actually I'm moving into the area just because it enables me to be able to step outside my own zone, my own self, and be able to see how I respond to situations. So working with heavy engineering and an engineering technician at Brighton University, and that's not part of my course, but it's something I just literally walked into the door one day and asked if somebody could help me with motion caption. We've now progressed, so what I'm wearing here, you can't quite see, but I have brainwave monitoring equipment on that's recording my brain activity with a VR, with a hospital simulation. And what came out of this research was the amount of brain activity that I was having within this simulation. Now, when I go into any hospital setting, I become quite anxious, and it's if I've been continuously into that setting, I'm straight back into the trauma. And that's quite difficult to remove myself from that traumatic experience. But what happened here was, after I'd been round this simulation, and you can't quite see it, but with the VR, it's a 360 room. And it's a very simplified hospital setting. But what that does is something that's just an initial research at the moment. But after I'd been through this, and it was literally a few minutes, my descriptive word was, I don't feel safe. And I wouldn't have come to that sort of insight, knowledge or understanding if I hadn't have done this experimental research. And this works for me really well because I'm on the edges of care. I'm looking at an otherwise pain management care community, because we've talked about it, but healthcare is really struggling at the moment to provide this, and chronic pain doesn't actually really fit within the the healthcare system narratives, because there's not enough understanding about it, and because it's so complex, it's so multi-layered, it's so dependent on personality and society, and privilege and background, and economics. But what happened here was when I spoke about the safe, that actually landed with me, and that's exactly how I felt. So that's something I'm exploring, and how I can bring that now within community. Work now is developing that I leave notes on benches for people to find. That's not something that I will gain research feedback from, but it's actually the sense of giving something back and maybe making that difference within the community. Another thing I'm looking at is audio time capsules. So when we're going through pain management, or we might have chronic pain, the initial stages of that, we record our journey, and it's just for ourselves. There's research now that actually it's not always beneficial to share it within a group. We need to be able to share it with ourselves first. And so it's creating this time capsule that we can maybe listen back to 6 months, 2 years time, and see the differences. And also that has implications, ethical implications as well, if that may not, that may become a legacy, or an educational tool for other people to learn from.
Thank you very much.